I lost 10 minutes of my life on New Year's night. Not because I passed out drunk, not because I fell asleep, but because someone was inside my house and hit me hard enough to erase what I saw. I never found out who it was. I never remembered his face. I only woke up on the floor, bleeding, with my front door still locked, and the terrifying certainty that if I hadn't regained consciousness, I probably wouldn't be here today. New Year's was supposed to feel loud: fireworks, parties, music leaking out of apartments, cars moving through the streets, people laughing somewhere in the distance. Instead, it was silent. I was alone that night. I'd already spent Christmas with family, and when New Year's came around, everyone else seemed to have plans except me. No invitations, no late-night calls, no reason to go anywhere. So I stayed home, grabbed a couple of beers, turned on the TV, and let the night drift by. I watched the Times Square countdown, the crowds packed together under bright lights, people screaming into cameras and kissing strangers at midnight. After that, I flipped through channels and landed on some old holiday movies. Nothing special, just background noise. Time blurred. I wasn't especially tired, and after sitting on the couch most of the evening, I started feeling restless. Around 2 in the morning, I stood up and stretched, staring out the window. Snow was falling lightly, not a heavy storm, just enough to dust the streets and soften the edges of everything outside. The neighborhood looked peaceful, cold, quiet, empty. A walk suddenly sounded nice. I grabbed my jacket, pulled on a hat and gloves, and stepped outside into the night. Right away, I noticed how strangely still everything felt. Even for 2 in the morning, especially on New Year's, I expected at least some movement. Distant music, a few cars, maybe people wandering home from parties. There was nothing. Only porch lights glowing softly, Christmas lights still hanging on a few houses, empty streets stretching into darkness. It was calm, almost soothing. I started wandering without any real direction. I wasn't fully sober, so time felt slippery, and my sense of distance was fuzzy. I zigzagged through side streets and quiet corners of the neighborhood, enjoying the cold air against my face and the crunch of snow under my boots. Eventually, I reached the park. The walking path hadn't been shoveled since earlier that day. A thin layer of snow covered it, maybe a couple of inches, not deep enough to stop me. I figured a change of scenery would make the walk more interesting. I stepped onto the trail and followed it into the park. After a few minutes, I realized 2 things at once. First, the snow was thicker than it looked, slowing me down and making each step heavier. Second, the lights along the path were off. Normally, the trail had small street lamps lining it, casting soft pools of yellow light along the walkway. Tonight, they were completely dark. The path disappeared into shadow almost immediately. That alone made me uneasy. I'd walked this trail at night before, but never in complete darkness. The trees swallowed everything beyond a short distance, and the deeper I went, the more isolated it felt. After a few minutes, I decided it wasn't worth it and turned around. I had only been walking back for about a minute when something caught my attention in the snow. Another set of footprints. They ran almost perfectly alongside mine. At first, I thought maybe they were old tracks that I hadn't noticed earlier. But when I looked closer, I realized they were fresh, crisp edges. No snow filling them in yet. Whoever made them had walked there recently, maybe only minutes ago. Someone had been right behind me. A chill ran through my spine. I stopped and looked around, scanning the darkness between the trees. I couldn't see anyone. No movement, no sound. When I followed the tracks with my eyes, I noticed something even worse. They didn't continue straight back toward the neighborhood. They veered off the trail, straight into the dark, into an area where I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me. For all I knew, someone could have been standing 10 feet away, watching me, and I'd never know it. My pace quickened. I told myself not to panic. Maybe someone else had walked the trail earlier and stepped off for some reason. Maybe it was just coincidence. I wasn't thinking clearly. The alcohol probably dulled my instincts more than I realized. Still, the feeling stuck with me. I stayed on the sidewalks after that, circling the neighborhood instead of heading straight home. I wanted to convince myself everything was fine before going back inside. After about 15 more minutes without seeing anyone else, I finally felt calmer. No footsteps behind me, no movement in the distance. When I got home, I peeled off my winter clothes and decided to take a shower. The warm water felt good against the cold still clinging to my skin. That's when I noticed something strange. Halfway up the stairs, I realized the upstairs was completely dark. That didn't make sense. I'm the kind of person who leaves lights on constantly. I hadn't been upstairs since waking up that morning. I was absolutely sure the lights were on when I left the house. Even if I'd been drunk, I would have noticed turning them off. A small knot formed in my stomach. I slowly climbed the rest of the steps and flicked the hallway light back on, scanning the space as if expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing looked obviously wrong. I checked each room one by one, peeking inside and closing the doors behind me. Bedroom, bathroom, spare room, all clear. Then I turned back toward the stairs. The first door near the top of the staircase was wide open. My heart dropped into my chest. I knew for a fact I had closed it. That was the moment it truly hit me. Someone was inside my house. I froze for a few seconds, barely breathing. My mind raced through possibilities. Had someone slipped past me? Were they hiding? Had they gone downstairs? My voice felt thin and shaky as I called out, asking if anyone was there. No response. The silence felt heavy. I took slow, careful steps toward the open doorway. My body buzzed with adrenaline, every nerve on high alert. Each step felt loud in the quiet house. My stomach twisted as I approached the dark room. And then, everything went black. I didn't fall asleep. I lost consciousness. When I came to, I was lying on the floor in the hallway. My head was spinning violently, a crushing migraine pounding behind my eyes. My vision blurred in and out, the edges of the room warping. Only about 10 minutes seemed to have passed. I had been attacked. Someone had knocked me unconscious, and I had absolutely no memory of what happened after approaching that doorway. Panic surged through me as I grabbed my phone and called 911. Whoever had been inside my house was long gone by the time help arrived. I gave the police every detail I could remember: the walk, the footprints, the lights, the open door, the blackout. They searched the house but found no sign of forced entry and no one inside. What bothered me most wasn't just the attack. It was the missing memory. I might have seen the person. I might have recognized them. I might have had a clear description. But my mind had erased it completely. To this day, nothing ever came from the investigation. No suspects, no explanation, no closure. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't woken up. Because sometimes I get the chilling feeling that whoever was in my house that night didn't intend to leave me alive. Story 2. You never expect the quiet place to be where something goes wrong. A ski resort in the middle of the mountains feels isolated, but safe. Locked doors, empty halls, snow swallowing every sound. That night, I thought the worst thing I'd deal with was boredom and cold air. Instead, someone vanished into the forest, and something watched me from the trees. I worked at a local ski resort in a small mountain town as maintenance and light security. Most of my job was basic cleaning, fixing small issues, and keeping things running overnight. But after a few break-ins over the years, people sneaking in to steal snowboarding gear or trying to use the slopes after hours, management started scheduling 2 employees overnight instead of 1. We didn't have cameras or real security systems, no motion sensors, no alarms, just us. The idea was that having people physically inside the building would discourage anyone from trying something. Technically, I was never working alone. My co-worker Matthew was always scheduled on the same overnight shift as me. The resort was split into 2 large sections connected by a long hallway. He worked on the opposite side, handling his own cleaning and maintenance tasks. Sometimes I wouldn't see him at all for days or even weeks, depending on how busy things were. So even though someone else was in the building, most nights felt like I was completely alone. That night started like any other. I clocked in and began cleaning the main floor. During the busy season, the place gets trashed. Muddy boots, spilled drinks, rental gear scattered everywhere. It wasn't hard work, but there was always a lot of it. About an hour into my shift, I heard something that made me pause. A tapping sound. It sounded like someone lightly knocking on glass. I set my supplies down and walked toward the front windows. At first, I didn't see anything, but when I got closer, I noticed footprints in the snow directly beneath one of the windows. The prints walked right up to the glass, then continued around the corner of the building. That immediately felt wrong. I put my coat on and stepped outside to look around. My first thought was that maybe someone was lost or confused. If it was a trespasser, I needed to tell them to leave. But once I reached the side of the building, the footprints disappeared into the parking lot, which had already been plowed. The trail ended completely. Whoever had been there was gone. It was too dark and freezing to wander the perimeter looking for someone, so I went back inside and tried to shake it off. I told myself it was probably nothing. About 30 minutes passed. I figured the snow had already covered any tracks by now anyway. My attention was back on work until I heard several doors open in the connecting hallway between the resort sections. A few moments later, Matthew walked into my area. He looked unsettled, almost confused. He immediately asked what I was doing. I stared at him and told him I was just working. He nodded slowly, like that answer didn't fully register. After a moment, he said he was probably just tired and shook his head. Before he left, I mentioned the footprints outside and asked if it had been him. He shook his head no. I expected him to explain why he looked so concerned, especially after hearing about the footprints. But he didn't say anything else. He just turned and walked back to his side of the resort. Matthew and I weren't close. We barely spoke outside of work, and he was much older than me. Our conversations were usually brief and practical. That's why I didn't press him or follow him back to his section. Still, something felt off. About an hour later, I heard a loud bang echo through the corridor connecting the buildings. It sounded like a heavy door slamming or something smashing into a wall. It startled me enough that I decided to go check on Matthew. I walked down the corridor and into his section of the resort. It was empty. I called his name. No response. I walked farther back, calling out again and again. Still nothing. Then my stomach dropped. The back door was wide open. Snow was blowing inside, and the cold air poured into the hallway. It looked like the door had only been open for a few minutes. I rushed outside. I didn't see anyone, but there were fresh footprints leading away from the building, heading uphill toward the ski lifts. Matthew had no reason to be out there. I yelled his name into the wind, but my voice barely carried. Now I was genuinely scared. I searched the building one more time, checking every room, bathroom, and storage area. Nothing. The only evidence I had were the footprints disappearing into the snowy darkness. I grabbed my coat and went back outside. I followed the footprints. They stretched much farther than I expected. The resort lights faded behind me as the trail climbed toward the base of the ski lift and slightly up the hill. Everything was silent except for the wind and the soft crunch of snow under my boots. The footprints led directly toward the tree line. Beyond the trees there were no lights at all, just dense mountain forest. That's when a terrible thought hit me. These might not be Matthew's footprints. I called out his name again. Several long seconds passed. Then, deep between the trees, something moved. A figure stepped slightly into view and turned its head toward me. From what little I could see, it did not look like Matthew. Fear exploded through my body. I ran. I sprinted back down the hill, slipping and falling in the heavy snow, barely keeping my balance. I didn't hear footsteps chasing me, but I felt watched the entire time. I slammed the door behind me and ran to the front desk, using the phone to call the police. Being in the mountains, they told me it would take about 30 minutes to reach the resort. I hid in a storage closet filled with rental gear while I waited. The building felt impossibly silent. About 10 minutes into hiding, I thought I heard another door open somewhere on the opposite side of the resort. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I didn't dare look. Eventually, the police arrived. They found another set of footprints leading back toward the open door. Whoever had been in the woods had returned, possibly looking for me. Matthew was officially declared missing. The police found no signs of violence inside the resort. They suspected Matthew may have known whoever lured him outside, or that someone convinced him to leave willingly. Once the footprints reached the forest, the trail vanished. For a while, I was even considered a suspect, since I was one of the last people to see him alive. Eventually, they cleared me. I still think about that night. I wonder if there was something I could have done differently. But I also know that if I had followed those footprints deeper into the forest, there's a very real chance I would be missing too. Story 3. They say rest stops are safe places. Lights on, bathrooms open, somewhere to breathe when the road gets too heavy. But that night, in the middle of a whiteout blizzard, I learned something terrifying. A rest stop isn't always a place to rest. Sometimes, it's where someone waits for you. And if I had pushed that bathroom door just a little harder, I probably wouldn't be telling this story. It happened about 4 years ago, right around the holidays. I had driven all the way out to a small town in Montana where my parents lived, planning to surprise them for Christmas. I stayed for about a week before heading back home. The drive was roughly 16 hours, but I never really minded it. I preferred pulling into rest stops and sleeping in my car for a few hours instead of paying for a hotel. It saved money, and honestly, it made the trip feel faster. That day, I left earlier than planned. There was a big winter storm forecasted, and I wanted to get ahead of it if possible. For the first 4 or 5 hours, everything was fine. The highway was quiet and mostly empty. Then the storm hit, fast. One moment the road was clear. The next, snow was everywhere. The wind started pushing my car sideways, throwing sheets of snow against my windshield. Visibility dropped fast. I wasn't losing control, but the constant tension was exhausting. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, my eyes burning from staring into the blur of a white. About an hour into the storm, my phone buzzed with a winter storm warning. A minute later, I lost all service. That's when the situation started feeling uncomfortable. If something happened out here, I wouldn't be able to call anyone. No signal, no help. So when I saw a rest stop sign coming up, I took it. The rest stop was small. Just a snow-covered parking lot surrounded by trees and a single service building. Everything looked buried under fresh snow. There was only one other car parked on the far end of the lot. It looked like it had been there for a while. Snow had piled thick on the roof and windshield. A few minutes after I parked, the storm somehow got even worse. The wind howled. Snow slammed sideways through the air. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. I couldn't even see the other car anymore. It was a full whiteout. I sat in my car for about an hour, watching snow stack up against the windows, trying not to think about how isolated this place felt. Eventually, boredom and discomfort pushed me to go inside and use the restroom. The moment I stepped out of my car, the cold hit like a punch. The wind burned my face and cut through my jacket. Snow stung my eyes. I hurried toward the building and slipped inside. The lobby was small, a couple of benches, a rack of pamphlets and road maps, and 2 doors leading to the bathrooms. Thankfully, the heat inside was working. I stood there for a moment just warming up, watching the storm through the window. I could barely make out the outline of the other car now, completely buried in snow. It didn't look like it was running. That struck me as strange. It was well below zero outside. If someone was sitting in that car without heat, they'd be freezing by now. After a minute, I walked toward the men's restroom and pushed on the door. It cracked open maybe an inch, and then slammed shut. I tried again. This time it barely moved at all. I stepped back. It didn't feel like the door was locked. It felt like someone was physically holding it shut from the inside. I stared at the door, confused and suddenly uneasy. My first thought was maybe someone was leaning against it accidentally, but the pressure felt deliberate. I considered using the women's restroom instead, but something about the situation felt wrong. Really wrong. The idea of staying in that building suddenly made my skin crawl. I decided not to push my luck. I turned and hurried back outside into the storm. As I stepped out, I heard the bathroom door swing open behind me. I didn't turn around. I walked fast back to my car, my heart beating harder now. Snow had completely covered the parking lot by this point. I wasn't even sure if I could leave without getting stuck, so I stayed in my car, engine running, trying to calm myself and make sense of what had just happened. How would someone know I was walking toward the bathroom? How were they already positioned to block the door? None of it made sense. A few minutes later, movement caught my eye through the whiteout. A shape slowly emerged between my car and the building. A person. As soon as he became visible, he stopped walking and just stood there in the storm. He appeared to be on his phone, talking to someone, facing toward my car. I couldn't tell if he was looking directly at me yet. He paced back and forth in a small area, still talking, lingering in the blowing snow. Then, slowly, he began moving closer. A few steps forward. Pause. Another few steps. Pause again. Like he was trying not to make it obvious. When he got close enough, I could clearly see his face. He was staring straight at me, and then his mouth stretched into this wide, unnatural smile. He walked right up to my car and tapped on the window, still grinning. I froze. My body completely locked up. My hands wouldn't move. My brain screamed at me to drive, but fear pinned me in place. He started knocking harder. The sound echoed inside the car. It was aggressive enough that I thought the glass might crack, and then I saw something that snapped me back to reality. Behind him, in the distance, another man burst out of the rest stop building and started running toward my car. Adrenaline slammed into me. I threw the car into reverse. The tires spun uselessly in the snow. The engine roared, but the car didn't move. The smiling man was getting closer. The second man was running fast now, closing the distance. My stomach dropped. For a terrifying second, I thought I was stuck. Then suddenly the tires caught traction. The car jolted backward violently. I slammed it into drive and punched the gas. In the split second before I pulled away, the second man raised his arm and threw something, a knife. It slammed into the windshield and bounced off, leaving a massive spiderweb crack across the glass. I screamed and sped out of the parking lot, barely able to see through the storm or the shattered windshield. My hands were shaking so badly, I could hardly keep control of the steering wheel. I fully expected them to chase me, but as far as I could tell, no one followed. I drove dangerously fast through the storm until visibility finally improved and my phone regained service. I called the police immediately and told them everything. By the time officers reached the rest stop, the storm had already buried most of the tracks. They didn't find either man, but they did find the car. It was still parked in the lot, untouched, and it wasn't connected to either of the men. The car belonged to someone else entirely. A man reported missing shortly afterward. When police showed me his photo, I didn't recognize him. Over the next few days, more details came out. The missing man had been on a road trip. His family believed he'd pulled off the highway to sleep during the storm, and was never seen again. No signs of where he went, no body, no explanation. I'm convinced something terrible happened at that rest stop before I arrived. I believe one man stayed outside as a lookout, pretending to be on the phone, while the other stayed inside, blocking the bathroom door and waiting. Had I forced my way into that restroom, I don't think I would have walked back out, and I don't think they would have let me leave alive. Story 4. I always thought you'd feel it if someone was in your home. A creak that doesn't belong, a door that doesn't close right, a shadow where there shouldn't be one. But the scariest part of what happened to me is this. For weeks, I was sharing my house with something I never saw, and it learned my routine better than I knew it myself. I moved into the place in early spring, after a breakup that left my life feeling hollow and too quiet. It was a small, older house at the end of a residential street. Nothing fancy, nothing dramatic. The kind of neighborhood where porch lights stayed on and people waved even if they didn't know your name. The landlord called it cozy. I called it cheap. The first few days were normal. I unpacked boxes, assembled furniture, tried to make the air smell like me instead of the stale, dusty, previous tenant scent clinging to the walls. Then the house started doing little things that didn't fit. The first time I noticed, it was barely anything. I came home from work, dropped my keys in the usual bowl by the front door, and went into the kitchen. My dish towel, the one I'd left folded beside the sink, was hanging neatly on the oven handle. I remember standing there, holding my bag, trying to picture myself doing it. I shrugged it off. Maybe I'd done it without thinking. A day later, I opened my closet and saw my work shoes lined up like a display. I didn't line them up. I kicked them off. Another time, I found my TV remote sitting on the arm of the couch, perfectly centered, like someone had placed it there deliberately. I started joking with myself. Congratulations, you've got a polite ghost. But jokes don't last long when the house starts answering back. One morning I woke up to the sound of the shower running. Not dripping, not pipes, a full, steady shower. I sat up so fast my neck hurt, heart pounding before my brain caught up. Then it stopped. Silence flooded back in. I waited, holding my breath. Nothing moved. I checked the bathroom. The tub was dry. The curtain hung still. No warmth in the air. No steam on the mirror. I stared at the faucet like it had lied to me. That was when I started locking my bedroom door at night. Not because I thought it would help exactly, more because it made me feel like I was doing something, like I could draw a line between me and whatever weirdness was creeping into the place. A week later, I found a mug on the counter with a faint ring of coffee at the bottom. I didn't drink coffee. Never have. The smell alone made my stomach churn. I hadn't even bought a coffee maker yet, just tea bags and bottled water. I picked up the mug, turned it in my hands, and noticed something else. A thin smear of lipstick on the rim. I don't wear lipstick. I washed the mug twice. Then I washed every mug. Then I stood in the kitchen and listened to the house, as if it might confess. That night I tried to sleep with a podcast playing low beside my bed. Human voices helped. They made the quiet less sharp. Around 2 a.m., I woke up with the same feeling I'd started getting more often, like my body knew something before my mind did. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like the air had changed, like the room had shifted slightly off-center. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for the feeling to pass. And then I heard it. A soft, careful sound, like fabric brushing fabric, right outside my bedroom door. Not a step, not a creak. Something lighter, someone shifting. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I didn't even swallow. I watched the crack beneath my door, waiting for a shadow. Nothing. But the sound continued, subtle and patient, like whoever or whatever was out there knew I was awake and was simply waiting for me to prove it. After maybe 30 seconds, it stopped. I lay there for an hour, frozen until my muscles ached. When morning came, I opened the door and checked the hallway. Nothing. Everything looked normal. Except for one thing. The thermostat. I kept it set to the same temperature every night. I was weird about it. I liked consistency. It was set 5 degrees warmer. I stared at it, trying to invent a reason. Power surge, glitch, my own clumsy fingers. But the buttons were small. You had to press them deliberately. Someone had warmed the house while I slept. That was the day I bought a small, cheap security camera online. One of those basic ones that recorded motion and saved clips to your phone. I mounted it in the living room, pointed toward the hallway and front door. Then I waited. The first night, nothing happened. No movement, no alerts. The second night, I got one notification at 3:11 a.m. The clip loaded. The hallway was empty. The house looked exactly the way I'd left it. Then the camera's night vision brightened slightly, adjusting, and the image sharpened. And I realized something chilling. The hallway light was on. I never left it on. The camera recorded the glow spilling across the floor. The angle was wrong too, as if the light wasn't coming from the hallway lamp, but from the bathroom down the hall, a door I always kept shut at night. On the clip, the bathroom door was open just enough to let the light through. Then, slowly, the door opened wider. No hand appeared. No arm. No body. Just the door moving as if something unseen was pulling it from the inside. I watched, breath locked in my chest, as the door eased open, and the dark space beyond it seemed too deep, too thick, like the camera couldn't understand what it was seeing. Then, barely visible, something shifted in the frame. Not a person stepping out, more like a shape leaning around the door frame. Tall, narrow, too still. The clip ended. I sat on my bed, staring at my phone until my hands started trembling, because the camera had picked up movement in the hallway, and whatever caused it hadn't walked like a normal person. It had waited behind a door and leaned into view like it was curious whether the camera could see it. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I turned every light on in the house and kept the knife block on the kitchen counter within reach, even though I knew how ridiculous that was. If something in my home could open doors without hands, what was a kitchen knife going to do? Still, in fear, logic becomes decoration. At sunrise, I called my best friend and asked if I could stay at her place for a night or two. I didn't tell her everything. I said I thought someone was messing with my house. I said I needed company. She asked if I wanted to call the police. I almost did. But what would I say? "Hello, officer. I have video evidence of a door opening." So I didn't. Instead, I did what so many people do when they're scared and trying to stay rational. I tried to prove myself wrong. That afternoon, I came back to the house with a plan. I was going to check everything top to bottom: attic hatch, crawl space, closets, vents, everything. I brought a flashlight, a screwdriver, and a kind of determination that felt like I was pushing against the panic with sheer force. I checked the basement first. It was unfinished, concrete floor, old shelves, nothing but dust and the smell of damp wood. No signs of anyone living there. Then the attic access. It was a panel in the hallway ceiling. I pulled it down and aimed the flashlight inside. Insulation, rafters, darkness. Nothing. I was almost relieved. Almost. Because as I closed the panel, I saw something tucked on the top shelf of the hallway closet. Something I hadn't put there. A folded blanket. Not mine. It was a thick, older blanket, the kind with rough wool and faded stripes. It looked worn but clean, folded carefully like someone wanted it ready. My stomach turned cold. I stepped closer, slowly. Under it, in the shadow of the shelf, was a half-crushed plastic water bottle, and beside that, a small paperback book with the cover torn off. Someone had been storing things in my closet. No, worse. Someone had been sleeping somewhere in my house. I took the blanket down with 2 fingers like it might bite me. The smell on it wasn't mildew or dust. It smelled like skin, like someone who'd been warm under it recently. I backed away, every nerve screaming. That night, I stayed at my friend's place, and for the first time in weeks, I slept without waking up to that heavy, watching feeling. But the next day, I had to go back. I couldn't just abandon everything. I needed answers. I called in sick to work and returned with my friend and her older brother. He was the type that didn't scare easily, which I wanted around me like armor. We walked through the house together. He checked locks and windows while my friend followed me room to room. "Maybe it's a squatter," her brother said. "Old houses get weird. People find ways in." "Then why didn't they steal anything?" I asked, voice thin. He shrugged. "Maybe they're careful." Careful. That word stuck in my throat. Because the house had been careful. It hadn't smashed windows. It hadn't kicked down doors. It had done small things. Quiet things, domestic things, like moving a towel, turning up heat, leaving a mug, like practicing what it meant to live here. We went to the living room. I pulled up the camera app. I wanted to show them the clip with the door opening. My finger hovered over the notification history, but it was gone, not just deleted. The entire night's footage had been wiped. I stared at the screen, refreshing, scrolling, my heart beating harder with every second. "It's probably a glitch," my friend said, but I could tell she didn't believe it. Her brother looked at the camera mounted near the bookshelf. "Could someone reach that and mess with it?" "It's linked to my phone," I said. "You'd have to—" I stopped, because the camera was angled differently than I remembered. It wasn't pointing toward the hallway anymore. It was pointed toward my bedroom door. I hadn't moved it, and neither had my friend. Neither had her brother. We'd been together. I felt the room tilt. We stood there staring at that tiny black lens, and for the first time I truly understood the shape of the horror. Whatever was in my house wasn't just hiding. It was paying attention. It didn't like being watched, and now it was watching me back. Her brother took the camera down. He pulled the plug. The screen on my phone went dead. "Okay," he said, forcing calm. "We're calling the cops." The relief I felt was immediate and sharp. But then, softly from somewhere deeper in the house, came a sound that made all three of us freeze. A floorboard creak. Not the settling kind, the weight kind. Someone had shifted their balance. In the hallway, behind us, her brother turned slowly. My friend clutched my arm so hard it hurt. The hallway was empty, but the bathroom door at the end of it was open, wide open. I hadn't left it open, and I hadn't checked it today, because I'd been afraid to. Her brother stepped forward, voice firm. "Whoever's there, come out. Police are on the way." No answer, just silence. Then, from inside the bathroom, a small sound like a wet breath. Too close to be pipes, too controlled to be wind. My friend let out a strangled sound and pulled me backward. Her brother moved toward the bathroom door, and that's when I saw it. Not a full figure, not a face, just a shape, tall, narrow, pressed against the inside of the doorway, like someone standing just out of sight. The weird part was, it didn't feel like it was hiding. It felt like it was waiting for him to step closer. Her brother stopped, hesitating, and that hesitation saved him. Because the next thing happened so fast, my brain refused it at first. The bathroom door slammed shut. Not a gentle close, a violent slam that shook the walls. Then the doorknob rattled like someone was twisting it from the inside, fast, frantic, like the thing behind that door was suddenly furious. Her brother backed away. "Nope, nope!" We ran. We didn't stop to grab anything. We didn't stop to think. We sprinted out the front door and down the porch steps like the house had turned into a trap. Outside, sunlight hit our faces, sharp and unreal. The neighborhood looked normal. Birds, a dog barking 2 houses down, a woman carrying groceries. It didn't match the terror still screaming in my bloodstream. Her brother called the police from the driveway. While he talked, I looked up at my house, and in the upstairs window, my bedroom window, there was the faintest movement behind the curtain, just a silhouette shifting, as if someone had stepped close enough to watch us. Then, slowly, the curtain moved. Not like wind, like a hand pulling it aside, and for the briefest second, I saw something I'll never fully explain. Not a face, just an impression where a face should have been. A pale, flattened shape behind the glass. Too close, like it was pressing itself against the window from the inside. Watching, learning, waiting. I stumbled backward, and my friend caught me. When the police arrived, they searched the house thoroughly. They found no one, no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints that helped, no clear evidence of a squatter. But they did find the blanket, and they found something else. Inside the bathroom, tucked behind the cabinet under the sink, was a small pile of things. A water bottle, a cheap lighter, a broken phone with no SIM card, and a torn scrap of paper with a list of times written on it. My times. When I left for work, when I got home, when I went to bed. A schedule. The officer called it someone casing the place, but I knew what it really was. Someone had been living around me like I was part of their routine, like I was something to study. I moved out that week. I didn't pack slowly. I didn't stay another night. I left furniture behind. I left dishes. I left half my life. Because once you realize something has been inside your home, learning your patterns in the dark, you stop thinking of home as a safe place. And even now, years later, I still have one habit I can't break. Every night before I sleep, I look at my bedroom door, and I picture it opening. Not fast, not loud, just quietly, carefully. Like whatever lived in that house is still out there somewhere, patient enough to wait for the next place that feels cozy.